Hello once again, and Tony here with a review of Wagner's Die Walküre, live from the Bayreuther Festspielhaus with Marek Janowski on the podium, which I heard as a radio transmission on BR Classic. I was really looking forward to this transmission due to the fact that we have a cast of singers that look really great on paper, headed by the likes of Catherine Foster, Heidi Melton, Christopher Ventris, Georg Zeppenfeld, Sarah Connolly, and Jan Lundgren. How well did these guys fare? Well, I'll talk about them when I get to the singers. But first, a few words of what I thought about the production based on images I saw on Google. It was a step up to what I thought about the production of Das Rheingold, which, as you know, was quite cluttered in my opinion. At least with this production, it was more structured, and it was actually a lot more wonderfully lit, which is very dramatic and really does play the concept of fire very well. And the costumes looked really lovely. What I noticed about this production was that they have transported the actions from Das Rheingold, which was set in a rundown hotel in Texas, to setting the actions in Die Walküre, which is set in a rundown warehouse in Russia. I thought that was quite interesting. But I will say this, at least it was a step up to what I thought about Das Rheingold's more cluttered production. This production, based on the images I saw, seemed a lot more organized and seemed a lot less cluttered. But that's just me. Now we get to the singers, starting off with Christopher Ventris as Sigmund. I've heard this gentleman a lot on YouTube and even on Spotify, most notably as Parsifal and some excerpts of his Lohengrin, and he had a very fine voice. And nowhere is this evidenced as his performance as Sigmund, a role in which he's been specializing for many years. I really have to say that his voice was absolutely fine and really well focused and has that great amount of clarion quality which I really love in any Heldentenor singing Sigmund. Yes, I would have loved to have a more baritonal tone a la Ramon Vinay or even the likes of Lauritz Melchior, but I still have to give my hat off to Mr. Ventris for what he was able to pull off with his signature role of all time. It was definitely a very fine vocal performance, which was so full of heart and so full of soul that I practically was totally immersed in his overall vocal performance. And he was able to use that Heldentenor instrument very wonderfully, even though I would have loved to have a more baritonal voice. But I digress. I still have to give my hat off to this gentleman for really giving off such a wonderful vocal performance. And for someone who's also pushing near his 60s, he still has a very fine timbre. And it just goes to show how much longevity can be able to really make a singer as great as he was many years ago and still continues to hold up to this very day. Singing the role of his twin sister, we have Heidi Melton as Sieglinde. I've heard a lot about this dramatic soprano. Some great things, some good things, and some iffy things. She's been one of the top flight dramatic sopranos to specialize in roles like not only Sieglinde, but also the Third Norn, Gutrune, Amelia from Un ballo in Maschera, and of course, what she's singing these days, Isolde. Based on what I heard on the radio, she has a very fine voice when she uses it very well. And not to mention, this is her Bayreuther Festspielhaus debut, because she was replacing Jennifer Wilson, who was supposed to sing the role of Sieglinde, but due to a lot of other engagements and also due to health problems, she was indisposed, and Heidi Melton basically jumped in. She does have a very fine voice and has a very fine and focused instrument. However, when she gets the high notes, there are times I noticed some inconsistencies. Maybe it was just because she was nervous, as when you're making your Bayreuther Festspielhaus debut, it's a very nerve-wracking experience, and you really have to hold up against all of your colleagues and even for your colleagues. I thought that she was a very fine musician, but unfortunately, she was the weakest link as her vocal inconsistencies were pretty present. And there were times that she kind of wobbled, there are times that she sang a bit flat. But despite all of those shortcomings, she still manages to give a fine portrayal of Sieglinde. That's not to say that I think Heidi Melton is a bad singer. She's a very fine singer, but I guess it's just due to nerves and due to the absolute stress of really trying to really make sure that you give a fine performance and the pressure that a lot of singers have when they make their Bayreuther Festspielhaus debut in certain roles like this. So it's just nerves, and I'm sure that she'll get a lot better as the seasons progress. For now, she's a very fine musician despite some of the inconsistencies she has. Now we go to Brunhilde, sung by yet another top flight dramatic soprano who's been specializing in a lot of heavy roles as of the 21st century, Catherine Foster. Catherine Foster started out singing a lot of the dramatic coloratura soprano repertoire like The Queen of the Night and Donna Anna before transitioning into the more lyrical roles like Mimi from La Boheme and Agathe from the Freischütz, and even to the more spinto roles like Leonora from Trovatore, to the more dramatic roles like Abigail from Nabucco and the Empress from Die Frau ohne Schatten, and eventually to the Wagnerian soprano roles of Brunhilde, Isolde, and Elektra. She has a very fine and gorgeous voice. However, she had a very lukewarm start when she sang her Hoyotohos, but she got a lot better as the transmission progressed. Her voice showed a lot of fullness in the later parts of the opera, but her voice kind of thinned out in the Hoyotoho, but it just built up more and more in the later parts of the opera, and she improved very well. I thought she was at her best in the third act, where she really used her vocal prowess to her advantage and really showed that she can really own it as Brunhilde in her own special way. Yes, I would have loved to have a voice like Astrid Varnay or even the likes of Rositelli really singing this role. But I still have to give my hat off to Catherine Foster for really singing this role and really making this one of her signature roles of all time. Then we go to Wotan, sung by the grand dramatic baritone Jan Lundgren, who was in very fine voice and really made the best out of Wotan. And I really felt like his Leb wohl, du Königs herrliches Kind was the absolute highlight. His voice was very homogeneous, which is no surprise as he is specialized in all of the grand dramatic baritone roles and even to some extent the bass baritone roles. Roles like Johanna Ann, Amonasro, Telramund, and Kurvanal were basically roles he is specialized in and roles that he has become very famous for. And I thought his Wotan was absolutely well sung, with a finely placed voice and lots of charisma to really back his performance up, and just heaps of determination that just pours out of his mouth really wonderfully, giving off such fine steam to this very iconic Wagnerian character. And then we have the role of his wife, Fricka, the goddess of marriage, sung once again by Sarah Connolly. And out of the main women of this entire cast, I thought she stood out the most. She continues to use her secure, dramatic mezzo voice wonderfully, which is so well placed throughout all the registers and gives off ferocity yet suffering at the same time. And I thought that she was an absolute pro in this role. She was able to make her fierce yet someone who's vulnerable. She was able to make this character so multidimensional, which is not really easy to do on the radio. And she was able to really give off such fine steam to this really wonderful Wagnerian mezzo role, And she did very fabulously in her scene with Wotan. She was able to give off ferocity, vulnerability, and beauty all in one great package. Then we have Georg Seppenfeld as Hunding, and what more can I expect from a gentleman like Georg Seppenfeld? His basso cantante voice was absolutely wonderful, and it still is, especially evidenced in one of his signature roles. He has a well placed voice, and he really knows how to use a darker color to this very thankless role. He manages to make him menacing and mean sounding and venomous. He really did a very fine job embodying Hunding to such a frightening degree that I was totally immersed. And he even adds a great amount of charm to this very thankless basso role. Caroline Wimborne's Gerhilde was gorgeously sung, really using that spinto soprano voice to the best of her abilities and really giving that ring and ping to her voice. And it was just a magnificent vocal performance. Christiane Kohl as Helmwege was gorgeously sung. This was a soprano who started out as a light lyric soprano before transitioning into the more full lyric soprano roles and eventually the spinto soprano roles. And her Helmwege was absolutely well sung with a well-placed voice and great high notes and a fine technique to boot. Dara Hobbs's Ortlinde has a very rich and creamy voice, which is so wonderfully placed, and she has a very scintillating and gorgeous technique. Stephanie Hautziel as Waltraute was absolutely gorgeous, combining her smoky timbre to such scintillating high notes, even though I would have loved to have a more mezzo-contralto voice sing Waltraute. Nadine Weissman as Schwertleite was also gorgeously sung, really using that trademark mezzo-contralto voice to the best of her abilities and to the best of her skill just to make this Valkyrie come alive. Mareike Moore as Sigruna uses her fine lyric mezzo instrument to really make the best out of this character. Then we have the really awesome combination coming from Grimgerde and Rosweisse using Wiebke Lehmkuhl's mezzo-contralto voice with that of Alexandra Petersammer's dramatic mezzo voice, and their voices blended superbly, using that darker voice of Wiebke Lehmkuhl with that of Alexandra Petersammer's rock-steady, dramatic mezzo voice. And these 8 ladies sang fabulously as an ensemble, making the sister act very much worth the listen to. So overall, the singing was absolutely really good. The men, Georg Seppenfeld, Jan Lundgren, and Christopher Ventris were the absolute standout. Out of the main women, Sarah Connolly was an absolute standout thanks to her multi-dimensional portrayal of Fricka. Heidi Melton and Catherine Foster did very well in their roles, even though I would have loved to have a little bit more vocal security, but I still have to give my hat off to the both of them for being such fine vocal actresses. And the sister act coming from the likes of Caroline Wenborn, Christiane Kohl, Dara Hobbs, Stephanie Hautziel, Nadine Weissman, Mareike Moore, Wiebke Lehmkuhl, and Alexandra Petersammer was absolutely wonderful, really blending their voices together to create an epic sister act. And the conducting done by Marek Janowski was absolutely wonderful, and he really knew how to pay attention to every single detail on the text. So overall, there was some really fine singing, but I really have to give my huge kudos to Sarah Connolly, Georg Seppenfeld, Jan Lundgren, and Christopher Ventris for embodying their characters very well on the radio, and the sister act from the Ride of the Valkyries for doing excellently. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for my review of Elena Moshuk in Concert 2014, which I'll be watching on YouTube. So until then, good night, everybody.